Okay, so in Keyshot, we have worked so far on um, adding adding a bump texture, modifying the roughness, modifying the color of an object. Um, Try this one. So in this case, for example, I have this product. It's a kettlebell. Um, so in Keyshot, we have we have our materials, right? So for example, let's say that I will apply the plastic here.
I don't think you're sharing your screen.
So in this case, I have this kettlebell right here, right? It's something that it was built in SolidWorks. I'm gonna apply a material here. I just a plastic, right? Nothing nothing crazy right now, right? So usually we have been modifying these materials by just going to edit material. We are able to increase the roughness, which decreases the highlights, increase the refraction. So like it controls like how much more light is being casted backwards, right? So we can make it look like a very shiny kind of like latex material, right? Um, but it's still like if you start looking only these two options with plastics, your materials are gonna look better, but we can go a little bit further, right? And for this, what I want to show you is that if we do right click on the material, uh, once we're in the material tab, I could say edit material graph, right? And this is basically a network that shows how this material is built, right? Like this is specific plastic that I took from the library and I like dump into this product. This is how it's built, right? It's basically this plastic. Like if I, for example, double click here, I will get the same settings, right? But I'm also seeing, for example, that this network, this little link, this connector, is creating a network of nodes, right? Like this was the material node, which is basically, if I disconnect this, you will see what happens, right? This is basically a 2D geometry of the object, right? If I connect back to surface, that's how the material gets added, right? So in Keyshot, we have a couple of different type of um, nodes per se that we can use, right? Usually we're gonna see something as a material that controls the surface and the geometry. Then we have the material itself. In this case, it's plastic, right? I could, for example, if I double click on this one, I could go here and say, hey, instead of that, let's convert this material into metal. And the cool thing about doing this through here, I could also do this from edit material as well. I could go to flat, but as you can see, it's keeping my changes in the color, right? Instead of me just throwing like a different material, right? So in this case, I have this plastic. I could, for example, do right click. I have materials, right? Like which are the ones that we know so far we have. diffuse, flat, glass, liquid, metal, paint, plastic, right? Um, then we also have geometry, and this is going to relate to what I was telling Sarah, that like there are certain surfaces that will be very difficult to model in SolidWorks, but we can mimic them in Keyshot, right? And that's where the geometry nodes come into play, right? We have bubbles, displays, and in this case, the one that we're going to focus on is displays. Um, let's say, for example, uh, a quick example here. So let's say that I'm going to double click in this material. I'm gonna switch this to liquid. So it's gonna be like blue liquid now, right? You can see through it. Uh, in this case, I have like different options. I could say transparency distance, so I can make it more transparent. Like this looks like water maybe. Uh, it's a liquid. But what if I want to show bubbles inside, right? That will be something that has to do with the geometry itself, right? Because I'm trying to modify the geometry of the object and not the surface, right? So what I could do here, for example, is say geometry, and then there's only 4 type of nodes that modify geometry. In this case, I will pick bubbles, and I could, for example, connect this one to geometry. If I don't know what to connect it to, I could just hold on top of this node right here, and it will give me a couple of specific areas where I could on this one. Anyway, I know that displays, like any displays, geometry, any geometry nodes will always be attached to geometry, right? So in this case, I have attached the bubble node to geometry here, the geometry of my object, but I don't see any changes, right? The reason that I don't see any changes is because this specific geometry node it needs to be executed before I see any changes, right? So if I go here, for example, I double click here, I will see that I'm interfacing in this case with liquid because I see this orange contour right here. If I double click on bubbles, now I know that I'm working on this one, right? And I could see the size variation, density, all of this refers to the bubbles itself, right? So in order for me to see this happening or affecting the product, the 3D model, I need to click here, execute geometry node. So I click here, now I see bubbles, right? And anytime that I do any changes, for example, I want to increase the size of these bubbles here, I could click again, execute geometry, and then you will see it changes, right? So how would this be important? So I'm gonna remove this one because I don't want to use it right now. I'm gonna say delete. Once I click here, geometry nodes again, this is gonna refresh the material, right? So I'm gonna go back here, double click. In this case, let's say metal. So now it's metal. I could modify the color, just make it gray. But this material looks very, very, very smooth, right? Like usually this type of dumbbells or like weights, they have a really rough texture on top, right? So I could, for example, do right click here. And in this case, instead of using geometry, I will use textures, right? My textures are gonna be texture maps that will affect the surface of the material, right? And they will be always applied as bumps, right? So I could do a mesh, I could do brush, I could do noise fractal. Those are like the most common ones that you can use. So for example, in this case, I'm gonna try to use a noise fractal. And if I double click on it, it's not connected, so I don't see anything affecting my product right now, right? So if I double click on it and press C on my keyboard, I will see a preview of how this mesh will be, or this texture will be applied to the overall product, right? And this is just a preview of the mesh. I'm not seeing the metal yet because it's not connected, right? So in this preview, which is very useful, what I could do is, okay, I could, for example, go and modify the scale. Could say, hey, maybe that's too big, maybe it needs to be smaller. In this case, I wouldn't modify the color because this type of texture, I think this is, I'm not sure if I'm correct, but it's like an alpha channel or something like that, where the most important thing is that as long as it's black and white, I do have a lot of control. And in this case, I'm gonna use it as a bump, so I just want to see this affecting the surface of my metal, while at the same time being able to see the object as metallic, right? I could zoom in, for example, to see the changes that follow will create. So I'm gonna drive this to 1, just to see how normally it would be. So in this case, follow is controlling kind of the contrast of this object, right? So I'm just gonna leave it at 1. Bump height will be important, right? Because bump will be the one that is gonna be able to create the illusion of relief, right? That we see like kind of like a bumpy. So let's say I'm gonna put it at 1. And we don't see anything right now. We're gonna start seeing this once we connect the materials. If I increase levels, then the material will, oh, what is this not showing? Let's just leave it at 5 for now. In this case, the mapping of this object is centered around the model, but I could just say a specific part. In this case, it hasn't changed too much, but you know, depending on the type of object that you're trying to model, you know, you get like control over the mapping, right? In this case, this is a very simple object, so I'm not having to do much. That's okay for now. So I'm gonna click here. Okay. Again, this is how you move the texture, right? But for now, I don't need to move it much. So that's fine. I'm gonna leave it there. Now, if I connect this, if I take this node here, drag it, I could see a reference of, okay, you could connect this noise fractal to color, roughness, bump, or opacity, which is pretty cool, right? In this case, I'm gonna go for bump, connected there. Once I hit press C on my keyboard, I will go back to the material. Now I'm seeing the material with the bump that I added, right? So in this case, I think the bump is very high, so I'm gonna decrease that. I could go to the metal and maybe increase the roughness so it's not that shiny. Start at 1 and then see from there how it looks. Maybe increase it a bit. Maybe I want to have like a rougher texture too. So I could do another texture. In this case, I'm gonna combine this bump with noise texture, which is similar. So I'm gonna double click on it, see and preview it. I could adjust the scaling as well. I think in the previous one I was using like 2 millimeters, I believe. 5. So I'm gonna match it. I'm gonna say 5. And again, in order to see a preview, you need to click C on your keyboard while you're in the material graph. So I'm able to see maybe, let's do maybe 3 millimeters. And again, I have like bump height, color 1, color 2. In this case, I don't really care about the colors because I'm controlling the colors with this metal. But if I want to add this as a bump again, there's no more links for me to do that. I could say bump, and now it's gonna switch between noise fractal and noise texture. But I want to have both, right? So one thing that I could do here is do right click And in this case, okay, so I show you materials, right? We have plastics, metals, liquids, etc. We have geometry that are the ones that are the nodes that are gonna be able to be attached to geometry and are gonna change the geometry of your object. Then we have textures, right? The ones that we're gonna use for color, bump, opacities, etc. These are like the most useful ones. We have animation, which we're not gonna get into yet, but we will at some point. And then we have utilities. And in utilities, these are basically the controls that we're gonna use to, for example, what if I wanna have two bumps? I could click with utility, say bump add. And now, as you can see here, for example, this utility has bump one, bump two. So I could connect this one here, connect this one here, and then connect it to the bump. Now if I disconnect this one, you will see a change, right? If I double click in this bump, I will not be able to see a preview. I can see the individual previews if I do see, right? But if I click on this one, I could control the ratio, right? So right now this bump is being affected by the noise fractal by 50%. And this one is affected by 50% as well. That's why the ratio is 0.5. Weight one will be linked to bump one. So if I want to have a lot more, if I want this product to be affected more by this type of bump, I could increase this one or decrease it, right? So I would say just play with that, try to understand that. But the main concept here is that we can have now different bumps into one material, right? If I want to decrease them because, oh, maybe it looked too rough, you know, I could decrease this one as well. And then the object looks a little bit smoother, right? Let's see what happens if I go 0, 0. Yeah, you see, so in this case, because the influence of bump one and bump two, or weight one and weight two are 0, it shows that like, okay, yeah, everything is like there's no bump affecting anything. If I start increasing this, you'll start seeing the changes, right? And then I will add this one as well. Click here, increase the roughness a little bit. I could also apply this same process to plastics, right? I could switch this to plastics. In this case, it will look nice if I, for example, let's pick a blue color, say okay. So you see how vivid now this material is looking, instead of just me applying the one from the library and playing just with the roughness or the refractive index, right? Now I'm applying two bumps into one. I'm able to switch between materials and it still keep, and if I switch materials this way from here, I'm still able to keep the colors and the bumps. Nothing is changing, right? Imagine if I do this, just take a look at the graph. It has disappeared. If I go here, material graph, it's a new one, right? So I don't want to do that. I want to keep all the work that I created in my material graph. And if there's any changes to the material, I will go to the plastic, go to material type, and then change it from there. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's cool. Yeah.
So in this case, I'm gonna go back to plastic. So now let's jump a little bit into displacement, right? So let's say, for example, that I would like to change the surface of this sphere here, right? Uh, let's think back to the example that Sarah showed, that she was showing us images of that faceted surface, and that will be very hard to model in SolidWorks, but we can create something similar here by doing right click, going to textures, and in this case we're going to use something called procedure. Well, they're called procedural textures, right? Mesh is one of them. So I'm gonna preview this one. I'm gonna click there, double click here, press C. So just a bunch of dots, right? The difference with this is that this mesh is pretty much a vector. It's infinite, right? It's not an image. It's not a picture. So I could modify it endlessly. I could say, hey, I double clicked on it. I'm just previewing how these spots look everywhere on my product. But I could also say, hey, all right, I'm gonna click here, clipping and mapping. I could, for example, say, let's apply this object, this mesh, instead of a box, let's do it as a cylinder. And that looks better, at least in this area. I could take care of this in a bit. I will show you how. So I'm more interested of this area of the sphere. Or I could also say planar or cylinder, right? So in this case, the reason that I'm seeing this mesh affecting the whole product and not only is here is because I modeled this as a single part in SolidWorks, right? In hindsight, I could have added a different color to the handle and a different color to the sphere. And then that will like allow me to just place the mesh in a specific area. But in this case, it's fine because I'm gonna do a process where I'm gonna create a mask on top of the product. So I'm only affecting the sphere. So in this case, I'm gonna go back to sphere because it looks the best in this area. I could, for example, say, center this on the part itself. I could also move my texture, but I don't want to do too much of that right now. But I could do things like this, right? Fit the part to the X axis, the Y. In this case, the Y will be the best. And that will be okay. Then, for example, let's say that I'm done with clipping and masking, then I'm gonna go to color. Color basically is just, what is the color of the little dots? In this case, for what I'm trying to achieve, I'm just gonna leave it as black. Here, one thing, so like this is something that I don't really understand, but I know that this is the best option for when you're trying to create geometry displacement map, is that we need to select a stencil patch. Just make sure that if you are working under color for that specific mesh, we hit stencil patch all the time. Why? I don't really understand why. There's like slight differences between all of these different options, but a stencil patch works the best when we're trying to use this as a texture. So I'm gonna click there, then I'm gonna check bump, but in bump I don't want to do anything for it right now. Shape and pattern is very important here, right? Because I could, for example, say I want ellipses, triangles, squares, right? So now we're getting more into like, hey, like maybe squares will be a way that we can actually create a faceted surface there, right? Pentagons. There's also lines. So let's say that I want to go to squares. And then I will zoom in, see how it look. I could increase the size of the see, this is apply as a mesh. This is sphere, so maybe I could increase the angle. I don't care about this. No, I need to modify the size of this. So in order for me to modify the size, I could increase here a scale mesh, increase the size of the mesh. So I'm trying to increase the size of this black squares. And then this one in pattern spacing, I could decrease this. So they start getting more and more closer to each other, right? Then I could also play with the angle. And increase the shape a little bit. Oh, nah, let's use this one for now. And then, yeah, I think that will be good. So I'm gonna leave this variation. I don't need anything there. Let's see. Jitter distortion. No, I don't need any of that. So if I go back here, you could see how like this is applied to the whole object. So in this case, if I connect this here, nothing's gonna happen. It's just gonna show me like now the color, the diffuse is diffusing this. So remember this was like blue plastic. If I connect it to anything that I connect to diffuse will change the color from plastic itself, right? So in this case, if I double click on plastic, it's blue, or it could be whatever I want. Or I think other thing that I want you to start doing as well is instead of modifying your colors with RGB, CMYK, I want you to use HSV, because this one gives you more control. Like I could just go for a darker value super quick. I could increase the saturation, right? I like this one a little bit better than the other ones. Click OK. But yeah, if anything that I connect to diffuse will change the color, right? That's not what I'm going for. I'm actually trying to change the shape of this, right? So now I'm gonna do right click. In this case, because I'm trying to modify the geometry, I will go for displace. I could connect this to here, connect it to geometry, and nothing has happened yet until I click execute geometry. Now this is a mess, right? Like it's super big. It's because I need to modify this one a little bit, right? My displace height is 100 millimeters, which is way bigger than the surface itself. If I say 2 millimeters and then click execute geometry, this is what I get, right? So I could start doing things as, hey, let's do just like 0.25 millimeters, execute geometry. That's a little bit better. But then, okay, what am I gonna do with the handle? Do I want the handle to look like that? No, probably not. So in this case, if you notice, we also have like something called opacity. I also have opacity in our area. So what I could do here, for example, is right click. I'm gonna go to textures, color gradient, double click here, see. So this is basically a gradient, and this is gonna be very useful for us because I'm gonna be able to mask specific areas of my product, right? Anything that is white would allow allow the light, the color and the materials to travel through. Anything that is black will completely block them, right? So in this case, the gradient is good, but the way that it's placed is not, it's not the best, right? And again, we know now how to play with the mapping. Like I could, for example, click here, move texture, and I could move this upwards, right? Because that's where I want the black. Put it maybe there. But I would like to completely have this as white, right? So maybe the other thing that I could do here will be play with these controls, right? So in this case, I'm modifying the gradient itself with this, right? If I remove this one, let's see. So I could also say it's vertical. That's useful. Yeah, that's the one I'm going for. Click OK. So the only thing that is bothering me right now is that I have this grading. I would like this to be completely black, so I could completely block the handle from getting the shapes. So what I could do here is this location control is basically, if you think about this value is in millimeters. This value is equal to the amount of this gradient area right here. So if I increase this, I'm technically reducing this gradient. If I make it into 1, see 0. This is the scale. So I'm modifying the scale of the gradient. Now I'm just completely making this black and white. Then I could go back to move geometry. Maybe there. So as you can see, I'm only allowing light to go through the white area, right? I think that's okay. Click OK. So now what I'm trying to do is I want to try to mask this. So I will need to create, let's see, utilities, what we call it, composite. So color composite is basically allowing me to create the way this is read by Keyshot is that similar to a bump ad where I have like bump 1 and bump 2, right? These two bumps are modifying. I'm gonna disconnect this so it's a little bit easier to visualize, right? So for example, this bump right here, this bump add, this utility is controlling the effect that this bump 1 and bump 2 are exercising on my product, right? Color composite works in a similar way where the source will be the main color and the background will be whatever background color. But in this case, I could use this here, and this will automatically combine those two colors, open air quotations, right? Because they're not colors, they're basically meshes. But as you can see, because I added this gradient on top, is covering the handle, right? That's basically what I want you to get with this, right? Color composite would allow you to create this type of effects, right? And because I'm using the displacement, once I connect this here to the geometry, nothing is happening, right? Because remember that I need to go double click on my displace node and then execute the geometry. And now my displacement geometry is only affecting the area that is being masked by this. Now, what about the color? Let's say that I want to add a gradient. Like I just don't want this to be blue. Let's say maybe I want a different color, but I want two colors, right? So what I could do here as well is, for example, use another utility, another color composite, attach it to diffuse. In this case, it's completely black just because there's no color. And in this case, I could attach a textural gradient, because gradient not only allows me to control like the gradients between black and white, but I could also say, hey, this color and then this one could be this color. Ugh. And then I could attach this to the source here, and that change a different coloration, that changed the coloration of the object, right? If this is if this could start to be getting very messy, right? Like this is, for example, is one material. I'm gonna close this. All of this is taking place within this material, right? Edit material graph, and then I see all of these mess in the material graph. I could click here. It's called line notes in the work area, and this will allow me to just organize that a little bit better. Let's say that let's say that I'm going to apply another material here, right? And I know that I didn't separate this correctly in SolidWorks, but there's ways to do this, right? So I'm going to take a new material, maybe a plastic from here, throw it into my material graph. I could preview this, and now I see it, right? And the way that you add different materials to an existing one is that there always will be connected to the first node, to your material node, and you will attach them as a label, right? And this will automatically override your previous material, right? Like this plastic, if I double click on it, let's see, I'm gonna reduce this, increase that, so you can see this is completely overriding everything else that I did, right? But my intent here is that it will only override the handle. So in this case, it's another example where I need to use opacity, maybe some gradients, right? So what I could do here is, let's see, I want to only show the handle. So maybe I will do utilities, no textures, C, move this texture. And if I press shift while I'm moving this texture, it just moves in increments of 15 degrees. I could lower this down. Again, I know that a sphere works better in this shape, just so I could mask central part. This one was the one. Let's see if this one works. How I'm planning. So I'm gonna move this downwards. Let's leave it there. I just want to see if it works or not. Okay. And now if I connect this one to opacity, as you can see, well, because of the colors, so let's switch this color. Double click here, switch this one to a yellow, so it's different. So you can see a difference. Click OK. And this is, we don't see anything because this is overriding the color, right? We also need to, for example, take this one and move it. So, so in this case, I'm modifying the mapping on this gradient, right? To get the two colors. Now, if I connect this one here, it will completely override this material is overriding that color. But then once I go here and click this on opacity, now I get that the bottom of this dumbbell is allowing this is being blocked. So I will get whatever result I had here before. I'm gonna disconnect this. So this handle should be purple at the end once I connect this back again. See, there you see purple, and this bluish is because of this color right here that is blocking the yellow, right? You could also click here and say, hey, be metal. And now that looks completely different, right? So I'm going to stop the demo here. And I want you to play with this a little bit.
Hey, Professor.
So I'm recording. Is that, for example, the lighting in this product right now? It's kind of alright. Usually Keyshot has these startup environment as the default, right? I could go and change this by dropping a new environment. Play with this, right? Like we already know how to use this ones. But I could also, for example, instead of just using this environment that I was given to me, I could create a new one. And in this case, I will double click here, go to HDRI editor. And in this case, what I could do is, for example, select color. So I'm gonna create my own lighting setup. Let's say that this is gonna be slightly gray. This button right here, add pin. A pin will be basically a light. So what I'm trying to do here, so you can have a better understanding of what I'm going for, is I'm gonna try to create one of these things like this, right? I'm gonna try to create my own 3-point lighting, right? So I'm gonna go here, add pin. And as you can see now, there's some lights there, right? If I, for example, switch back to settings, so I could see my standard settings for environment, I could, for example, switch the background to lighting environment, and I could see what's happening, right? This little point that I added translated into my environment, right? Like I'm using my custom environment. This environment is the one that I added. This is the one that I'm modifying, or my new one, right? And I could, for example, depending on what I want to achieve with this, I could move this light, camera, I'm gonna add a camera. Let's say that this is the way that I want to render this object. Save that camera, go back to environment, go back to HDRI editor. And then what I'm trying to do here is that I want to get us, I want to create a 3-point light system where the lighting is very consistent on my object and it looks very crisp. So one technique that I could use here is to switch this background to black, just so I can completely see this off. And then once I have my light is white. On background. Okay. And then my light is white. There you go. So in this case, my background is black, the light is white, right? So I could start aiming this to a specific areas of the product. So for example, if this is gonna be a key light, this will be good. That will be a good start. Again, once and I'm using this black background just so I can visualize the lighting hitting the object better. Once I'm happy with this, I could just switch it back to the like white or gray, whatever I want in the background. So in this case, I'm leaving this at least like this is. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it black for now. The background. I'm gonna try to place this like yeah, maybe that will be interesting. I could also, for example, change the shape of this. So right now it's circular. I could also say rectangular. I could increase the size of it. Or I could say just half. So because this is gonna be my main light, I could make it at that size, increase the brightness. Then once I'm happy with that, I could create another pin, right? As you can see, like now I'm getting like another set of reflections, which is this light right here. If I want to keep being very methodical about this, I could just switch this one off and now try to place this one in areas where, for example, this light is not hitting, right? Like this light, and it's a little bit too bright, so maybe I could decrease the brightness of this one. Move it a little bit more to the edge right there. And now I know that I need to hit at least this side of the object. Now if I turn this one off, it's looking better, right? Now lastly, I will add the last one, which probably I need to hit the back of this, or maybe actually the back of the object. And I think my key light, so like this light right here, needs to hit the object a little bit more in the middle. So I could move that too. Turn this 3 on. That looks weird. Now I could go back to my settings, switch the background to color. Now my object seems a little bit more vivid, more crisp, right? Uh, that's another technique that we can use in Keyshot to get our renders to be more dynamic.